Hello, my name's Jack, and today I'm going to be talking about Premade Adventures in Dungeons & Dragons. So Premade Adventures are adventures that are made by companies such as Wizards of the Coast, TSR, or other third-party companies. Running these adventures is often looked down upon as compared to creating your own campaign, but I'm here to tell you that it is perfectly acceptable and actually encouraged to be running Premade Adventures. Just because you aren't running your own campaign that you came up with doesn't mean that your players are going to have any less fun. And your players having fun is what's important about Dungeons & Dragons. So as long as you and your players are having fun running the Premade Adventure, then I'd say by all means you should be running it. What a Premade Adventure does do is it allows for a new DM to have a stepping stone into the world of creating campaigns. It provides a nice framework for you to actually build within, and it gives you some of the necessary skills you need without allowing you to go too far off the rails and make an unpleasant campaign for you and your friends. Typically, I'd recommend once you get a Premade Adventure that you read it from start to finish. I know that that may seem a little annoying, but a Premade Adventure can often have twists in it that if you as the DM don't know are coming up, you may foreshadow things incorrectly, or you may say things to the players that are just incorrect and would confuse them later down the line when the twist does come up. Reading the Premade Adventure allows you to know everything that's going to happen and allows you to prepare for that in any way that you need to. Once you've actually read the entire Premade Adventure, it's time to actually start preparing what you are planning on doing for your friends. You know what your friends like as compared to what the author of the adventure has written. The author of the adventure isn't actually at your table and doesn't know your friends. So it's up to you to change the adventure not only to your friends' tastes, but to accommodate for things such as topics your players don't like having covered in tabletop role-playing games. Though it may seem that in a Premade Adventure, you won't be improvising as much as in a campaign-driven adventure that you made up, you end up improvising just as much because players are still players and they go off the rails regardless of whether a skilled author made the adventure or a newbie DM made the adventure. So when they do go off the rails, you need to be prepared to improvise. And the way I would recommend preparing to improvise is familiarizing yourself with the surrounding area of where your campaign is taking place. Knowing the area the campaign is taking place in allows you to come up with things that may be happening when your players decide to go off the rails. Like recently in my Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign, my friends went off the rails for a little bit in between two of the main story missions. They went off the rails a little bit during setting up a tavern, which is technically part of the adventure, but they decided to do it in a very unconventional way that the adventure doesn't discuss. They decided to try to start an organized crime ring in Waterdeep. And if I hadn't read the adventure, I wouldn't know about the criminal organizations that are located inside Waterdeep. So reading the adventure allowed me to know what would be happening in the criminal underworld when my friends decided to disturb it with their own activities. And from there, it's really just doing what any DM does when they're improvising. You just come up with some different challenges that your players encounter when they are trying to accomplish their goal, such as I had the cops show up to raid their location, and I also had it so that rival gangs were trying to disturb their activity. Another way my players went a little off the rails was with a set of cooks that were trying to ruin their tavern because they were paid by a rival tavern. That is part of the original story, but they decided that they were going to try to have the police not only arrest them, but have them quote unquote taken care of. So they wanted to do like a mob boss-esque execution type thing, but there wasn't any actual like plan in the campaign book for what to do if your players want to have these 3 cooks brutally executed by the police. So I had to come up with what challenges my players had to do to convince the police to have these guys executed and what proof they had to have. And my players ended up framing them for a series of heinous crimes, as well as framing the person that they suspected was putting them up to it for many crimes to also have their business shut down and have them beat up. The most important thing to remember is to prepare for the unexpected. And that may seem hard or even impossible because it is unexpected what your players are going to do. But what I mean by that is just know the local area and know what the NPCs in the area are trying to do. I'm not saying know every single NPC. You just need to know a couple of the important NPCs and just have the players interact with the important NPCs that you've set up in the area. It's actually quite easy to keep the players from interacting with a NPC that you don't want them to interact with. You can just have them described as a background character. As long as you don't go into too much depth describing each individual person that's walking on the street, your players won't want to interact with them. To get a player to interact with an NPC, it often requires a lot more effort than you would expect. Players actually have this pushback to wanting to interact with an NPC. So if there's no good reason for them to interact with them, they probably won't. So just know the important NPCs like shopkeeps or barkeeps or maybe the wizard in the area or the important nobles in the area, because those are the people that the players are going to want to interact with, because those are the people that the players are going to think about when they think, who should we go to or what should we do? We got a little off track there from the main idea of Premade Adventures, but you get the gist. Premade Adventures are good for a new DM who wants to get a lot of ideas, or an old DM who wants to do less work for their upcoming campaign. A Premade Adventure doesn't have to be a set-in-stone guidebook of what you're going to do with your players. You can read the Premade Adventure and decide to throw out 90% of it and just use the main bad guy, or maybe just the cool NPCs that you found in the book. Honestly, the Premade Adventure is yours to do whatever you want with, but if you are a new DM, I would recommend trying to stick closely to what is written in the adventure, because the people who wrote it are experienced with this type of thing, and they know how to write a good adventure with good plot points. So if you try to deviate a little too much without having prior experience on how to control a good campaign, you may end up derailing the campaign to the point where the players get confused or are walking in circles, not sure where to go next, and that's never a good thing. After you run a couple pre-made adventures, you'll get the general idea of how an adventure is structured and what an adventure actually needs, and you'll slowly realize that it's actually not that much work to write your own adventures and prepare your own campaigns for your friends. You'll find yourself wanting to make your own adventures very quickly, and then you'll just be buying pre-made adventures either for fun, like I do, where I just have a collection of books that I'm buying because I like to have the books and I like to look at the artwork, or because you want to actually read the pre-made adventures and steal the good ideas that are inside them. Oftentimes, pre-made adventures will have large gaps in their stories, or parts that the writers of the story may have overlooked and not thought of. The way I'd recommend you remedy these gaps in the adventure is by understanding the core story and understanding what your players like the most. So what you want to do is expand on the story in the ways that your players are enjoying the story. So if the gap is further into the story, I'd recommend waiting to see what your players actually are enjoying about the adventure so far, and then expanding on those parts. And even if you don't do that, naturally the players will fill in gaps oftentimes by themselves, just by going off and doing things with the NPCs that they like the most, or by talking to people who may have quests that they would like to be doing. You can then just give them what they want and continue the adventure that way and fill in the gaps by giving them content that they like. Or if the gaps are larger and maybe happening towards the beginning of the adventure, so you don't have time for your players to actually sit down and play the game before you start working on how to fill in these holes, I'd recommend just knowing your friends and knowing the people that you're going to be playing with and thinking about what they would like to be doing in a fantasy setting or in whatever setting your adventure is taking place in, and filling in with things that they would like. Like personally, I know my friends really like thinking about puzzles, and specifically thinking about puzzles on how to commit crimes in fantasy universes. I don't know why they like doing it. I also am guilty of enjoying doing this, but we often like to set up criminal enterprises in fantasy universes. So if I were to see a gap inside an adventure, I would go about filling it using that idea of committing crimes or setting up organized crime organizations within the underworld of the pre-made adventure. So once you know what your players like in a fantasy adventure, you should read through the pre-made adventure again and look for aspects of that within the pre-made adventure and then expand upon it. The way you should expand upon it is by taking what the story has already laid out for you and then coming up with just new and unique ideas that seem like they would fit within the current story, but also allow your friends to have more fun in a way that they appreciate. Another way to fill in gaps in a pre-made adventure is by taking inspiration from your players' backstories. So your players might be the type who like to write long and elaborate backstories, or even just paragraph-long backstories. You can read those and take ideas from that and then just implement aspects of their backstory into the actual adventure. Like if one of your players has the typical backstory of their family has all been killed by some mysterious person, or maybe a person that they know and they're seeking revenge for their family, you could maybe incorporate that person into the story somehow to help fill any gaps that may arise. Even if there isn't any gaps in the adventure, this is all also great advice for how to stretch the adventure out to be longer. Because sometimes pre-made adventures can be a little too short for my liking. I enjoy stretching them out to get maybe a couple extra sessions out of the content and the world that the pre-made adventure is set up. Because my friends like to stay with the same characters for a longer period of time, so I like to keep the adventure lengths at least 3 months long. So you can use all the previous advice that we just discussed and use it, instead of filling in gaps, you can use it to actually just shoehorn into the middle of the adventure to make the adventure a little longer. Obviously, it might be a little harder if the adventure is pretty solid and has very little room for things to be inserted within, but you can always find a little bit of downtime that the players may have, or you can go about trying to create downtime by allowing the villain to maybe take a break for a little bit or stop their nefarious plan for a couple of sessions by having the players do something that would delay the onset of the villain's main plan. And then once you've created that gap in the story or found the gap in the story that you're going to insert the content into, you can try to seamlessly insert it by having the NPCs from the actual pre-made adventure talk to your players about the content that you would like to insert. And this gives it more of an authoritative feel, because if a random new NPC shows up and starts talking about some quest that they need the players to go on, it feels less cohesive than if you have an NPC that has already been talking to the players from this longer adventure that they're going on, come up to them and be like, we need you to go on this adventure. I know it's not necessarily related, but I also have problems with insert your adventure, and then you just send them on that. So I think that's all I have for you today. So I hope you folks get out there and you get to run some good pre-made adventures. If you find any that are interesting, leave them down in the comments below. I'd like to look at them because, you know, I'm always looking for some new adventures to run with my friends, even though we have so many adventures that are left to be run. I think I'm looking into running Cursed Strahd, Out of the Abyss. I tried running Out of the Abyss a couple years ago, but I wasn't as good at DMing back then, and then the group fell apart due to the classic scheduling issues. But I'm looking for a new adventure to go on with my friends in a couple of months possibly, so I'm thinking that either I'm going to be running Curse of Strahd, or maybe if someone leaves a good review down in the comments below about some other adventure, maybe even an older style adventure from TSR or something like that, I'd totally be willing to take a look and try to run that. And maybe I'll even make a video talking about my opinion on certain pre-made adventures. I don't really know yet, but if you've ever run a pre-made adventure and had it go well, leave that down in the comments below. I'll be sure to read as many of them as I can. And if you could leave a like if you enjoyed the video, that'd be great. Thank you for stopping by. I hope you had a great day, week, month, and year.